You know her as the active stick. It's Laura Saba from Locked On Canadiens. Laura, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you, and can't wait to hear about Luke Richardson, potential future Blackhawks head coach.
Hi, everyone.
There we go.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about Luke Richardson, who is I think he's a well-loved person in hockey circles, I think.
Why is that? Why do you say so?
You know what? He seems to be, from all the player interviews, he's been in Montreal for quite some time now. He was in Ottawa before that. From player interviews, from the family story and everything like that, he seems to be the kind of guy that players would run through a wall for, which, you know, whenever you hear his defensemen talk about him, it's very much that way. He does seem to be a guy, obviously he had many years as a player. He does seem to be the kind of guy who knows how to talk to his players, communicate with his players. Really, I think he gives everybody a lot of time. And he seems to be that way with former teammates, with friends. Nobody would say a bad word about him. So he's definitely what I would term as a player's coach. And in Montreal, to be honest, he's definitely been the kind of person that has taken his role really well. You know, he's never kind of, when Martin St. Louis came in, who's, you know, it was an off the board pick, let's be honest, and somebody with no experience coming in to be a head coach. Luke Richardson did everything that he could to support Martin St. Louis. And, you know, when you talk about St. Louis, when he was asked when he was signed to an extension, do you plan on changing your coaching staff? And he said no, which to me, like, if you're a new coach, wouldn't you want to clean out your assistants and just sort of bring in your own people? So I feel like he must have made such a good impression on Martin St. Louis in that last like 40 games of the year stretch there, that, you know, he definitely seems to be a kind of team player. And again, when you hear his defensemen talk about him, and obviously in the Stanley Cup final last season, sort of the Western Conference final, which Montreal was inexplicably in, and the Stanley Cup final, Dominique Ducharme, head coach, had COVID, so he was out. So Luke Richardson had the bench for a couple of games, and the games went well. And they also, like, the way the players talked about his influence on the bench, like, he seems to be, to me, a very much loved guy in hockey.
Well, I remember, you know, when he did take over the head coaching duties during the Cup run last year, I remember when that was over, there was a lot of talk about him actually potentially staying in that role. You know, what was the thought process behind maybe sticking with him as the head coach rather than keeping Dominique Ducharme, having him come back?
Well, Dominique Ducharme overall was the architect of that Stanley Cup final run, whether it was for good or for bad. You know, it did mask a lot of the flaws the Canadiens had, and it was an improbable run, and things went very much in the Montreal Canadiens' favor. So you can't not reward a guy like that with an extension, even though it was time for him to, you know, it was like, they could have walked away from it, right? Like, it was time for him to renew the contract. They gave him a 3-year extension. You can't really not do that when somebody takes you all the way to the Stanley Cup final, when you're such an improbable team to do that. At the same time, Luke Richardson also does not speak French enough to be able to communicate with the media and the fans. And in Montreal, that is a huge deal. And I just want to say, because I know that a lot of people outside this market don't really understand that, and they think that it's really the Montreal Canadiens shooting themselves in the foot in terms of coaching or general manager candidates, is that we're here speaking in English, right? I am an Anglophone Montrealer, but Quebec is a province of 8.5 million people, and that is, and out of whom I would say a good 6 to 7 million are Francophone exclusively. And that is the market for the Montreal Canadiens. So if you are a media-facing person and you cannot communicate in French, you're doing a disservice to the market. People are always like, why is it such a big deal? You just want a winner and all of that. No, it's important in this market because most of the exposure that people outside of the market have are to people like me who speak both languages and will communicate in English with outside fans. It's just, in Montreal, it is important that the face of the team, in whatever respect, is able to communicate in French, even if it's not great. I mean, Kent Hughes' French is not great, but, you know, he does communicate with the media in French. And, you know, so it's kind of a by committee thing. So we always knew that even though Luke Richardson might have deserved a chance to be a head coach, it would not be here.
Okay.
Well, if Luke Richardson decides, if he's the guy here in Chicago, he's coming to a team that will be very young and is rebuilding and tearing down. I know the Canadiens, for the most part, was a lot of veteran players the last couple of seasons. But have there been any success stories on that blue line? Because the Blackhawks have a lot of young defensemen coming up through the system. Have there been any success stories with the younger defensemen that where you've seen the progression that would make us excited to have Luke behind our bench?
I think it's a couple of things, because I have good things to say and not so good things to say. Because for me, the league is moving in a direction where you're less defensive defensemen and more mobile puck moving defensemen. Everybody has to be kind of two-way. I do think that the progression of Alexander Romanov over the last year and a half or so has been really, really key, because he does mentor really well. He's really good at communicating. But the thing that makes me a little bit nervous is that he does bring the best out of the players that he has. For example, Shea Weber, Ben Sherratt, like those were the anchors of that Stanley Cup run last year. They were so good. You know, every game you could praise the way that they were playing defensively as a team. But overall, in general, during the regular season in particular, on the penalty kill and things like that, you would sometimes feel like there was no defensive strategy. So to me, the question that I have is not necessarily, is Luke Richardson a good coach or a bad coach? It's how much of the defensive philosophy was being decided or being overridden by the head coach. Because the games that he coached by himself behind the bench, or when he was the head coach, those were great games, and the team was doing exactly what you would have wanted them to do. So I feel like from a mentorship aspect, I'm pretty confident that Luke Richardson can bring the best out of a young blue line. But in terms of philosophy, is he the new style, or is he the old defensive defenseman style? And there are tons of teams that are still married to that. There are tons of markets that are still married to that. But today's NHL is moving away from that. So my question is, I have not, and to be fair, it's because he hasn't been put in that position. I've not seen anything to say that he's evolving with the times. I think if you want to be a successful coach in today's NHL, you have to be able to evolve. You could be a long-standing, old-school guy, and if you're able to evolve, you will find success. So that to me is the question, because we haven't seen concrete proof of that, right? Like, and again, when he was the guy making the decisions for a few games, we saw what we wanted to see out of that blue line. And then, for example, Ben Sherratt or Shea Weber, those are what I would call old school type guys. They played their best in that run. So, you know, there's positive signs and there's negative signs. But to me, the big question mark is who was calling the shots when the strategy was not there. As for Alexander Romanov, like, he is a player that people are really excited about. There's a player, Jordan Harris, who only made the team after the NCAA championships were over, or the Frozen Four, I guess. And he only played a couple of games with the Canadiens, but he had good things to say as well. I mean, he made a lot of good, sound decisions on the blue line. And when you look at somebody like Matthias Norlinder, for example, who the Habs were considered to have kind of failed with last year, he is a defenseman who's very mobile and puck moving. But I think it was a sort of an organizational failure and not really the defense, the D coach failure in that scenario. So I do think that, like, I would be confident that he'd be able to mentor somebody, like inspire, motivate for sure, 100%. But in terms of strategy, that's what I have the question mark about. Like, I want to know who was making those decisions when they were not able to get it together. They couldn't get the puck out of their zone. The penalty kill was terrible. Like, it was generally a philosophy and strategy thing more than it was, bad defense.
Yeah, I was going to say, being in Chicago and hearing lack of defensive strategy, it jitters a little.
Yeah. So he'll fit right in.
Yeah, easy transition. So speaking of philosophy, we're not really sure what to make of the new Blackhawks front office yet, but looking at some of the periphery hires Kyle Davidson has made, it looks like they're going to have at least a big portion of things be analytically driven. Where is Luke Richardson in the analytic game? Is he just totally old school eye test? Is he a mix of both? Is he a numbers guy? And what about the Canadiens organization as a whole? Were they a very numbers driven org, or are they kind of best of both worlds?
I think in the past they were not, but with the new management, they are cautiously dipping their toes. I think much like the rest of the coaching staff, it's not that they're hesitant or anything like that. I do feel that there are certain old school coaches that feel like numbers don't tell the whole story until you kind of communicate to them that numbers are telling you what you already know. They're just quantifying them. So I think the big key, not just in Montreal, but also in Chicago, is not just having an analytics department, but having somebody either on the coaching staff or in the analytics department that can translate stats to old school hockey speak. Because most of the things that we're talking about, right? Like we're talking about shot attempts, we're talking about blocked shots or shots directed towards the goaltender. Those are not things that are new. They're just being quantified in a different way. And he's never come out and said that he doesn't believe in that or anything like that. But what they always say is that they believe that the numbers don't tell the full picture. So if he's open to it, and again, it goes back to coaching having to be sort of, you have to evolve with the times. So if he's willing to evolve and just, if he's willing to listen, I think that's key, because he seems to be so smart and he seems to be so methodical about what he does. He doesn't get heated or excited. He's not that animated person. He's just very chill. If he's open to that, I do think that he is the kind of person that he'll see the value and he'll listen and make decisions accordingly. He doesn't seem to be the kind of guy that would just shut the door on them. But he definitely was brought up like both as a player and a coach in that old school mentality. I think, though, once you become a head coach, the game changes a lot.
Well, I know when we talked to Tariq El-Bashir about Todd Reardon, one of the things that he said about Reardon was that he thought that there might be a difficulty transitioning from the assistant coach who kind of played the good cop in that role to being a head coach and experienced that when he was with the Capitals. You say that Richardson's a really good with the players, really communicative. Players really respond to him. Do you think there'd be any transitional challenges with him going from being, the assistant coach to the head guy, where you're kind of taking over everything? You're not just focusing on certain players or playing that role of like pulling a player aside after head coach gets after you and you're like, okay, well let's look at this in a better way. Do you think there'd be any issues with that, especially since he did have some head coaching experience in a intense time?
Yeah, it is short about it. I think, to be honest, I feel like he's the kind of person the transition would go really well, because he takes his job seriously, right? And so even though we're talking about how he is a player's coach and he's definitely the kind of guy that's going to be not your buddy necessarily, more like an older brother, an uncle, kind of like, shepherding you through. I do think that when it's time to get down to serious business, he has the ability to do that. I wonder, just in terms of whether or not, he hasn't handled a full bench in the NHL before, like whether that transition would just be jarring for him. But everybody has to do it at some point to find success, right? I think that the way that he approaches his responsibilities is a good sign, if that makes sense.
Laura, this has been great. It's awesome to get these coaching profiles. We want to make sure we have enough anger stored up when the hire's made so we can get mad and be irrationally angry.
We want to be informative and irrational at the same time.
Right. And we appreciate you joining us here. I know it was short notice. I reached out last night, so I appreciate you making this work on a busy day. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.